pratisahampati katan chanian sivarang ayacata santi kasatta paracakacatika ese dhammang anukam imang pachang. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, only a few more weeks left for the rains retreat. And I think now is probably appropriate time to start turning our attention to hopefully using what stillness, what energy we have in the mind, just get to start to contemplate, to look at or experience the world in a way that it helps to foster clarity, helps to foster letting go, relinquishment. In short, help to foster, to lessen the amount of suffering in our lives. And so tonight I thought, well, it's a good time to just to bring up the Four Noble Truths. And it's one of the first teaching that the Buddha gave after he became enlightened. And for those who don't know, the first noble truth is the noble truth of suffering. And these are noble truths because once you understand them, you realize them, then you become a noble person. Noble in the sense that it's part of the lineage of the enlightened ones, that you're on your way to full enlightenment. And sometimes people say that, Buddhists are so dour, dark, and pessimistic. They always go on and on and on about suffering. But remember, it's the second bit of it. It's the Buddha taught, that there's suffering. But he also taught the way out of suffering, that there is a cessation of suffering. And that's, one of the most amazing things for human beings, is to be able to understand reality, to see things clearly. And sometimes, with the practice of wisdom, or, we read and we understand, we hear that Nibbana is the highest happiness, so we all want to get there, have it, reach for it. But really, the end of suffering is not something that to reach for. As practitioner, what we're trying to do, hopefully over the last 3 months, is to cultivate wholesome states of mind in different ways. To cultivate the 5 spiritual powers, to use the 7 factors of enlightenment, to also foster the 4 divine abidings, and then to build up the spiritual, the barami, the spiritual qualities. And when these things grow, developed, becomes fulfilled, come to fulfillment, then the mind sees clearly, and it lets go of suffering naturally. As Ajahn Chah said over and over again, you see things clearly, there's no suffering. So it's not something you do, it's something that happens as a condition. And it's good to reflect. We're suffering. We get anxious, worried, angry, greedy. Then it's something we're missing. So instead of blaming the world for our unhappiness, we look inward and say, what is it that I'm missing? How can I see things in a different way to lessen the suffering in the mind? But also, so much of our suffering is obviously optional, something we add on to experience. From unrealistic expectation, and also the Buddha said there are many types of suffering. But a lot of it is something, some of it, there's nothing we can do about. The suffering of, OA, sickness, sufferings of being separated from what we love, the suffering, the stress of being in a situation that we'd rather not be. But those are normal. Those are part of day-to-day suffering. Sometimes our reaction to these unpleasant situations makes things a lot worse. We're sick and we don't want to be sick. Yeah, so that makes it a whole different level. We add so much to the suffering of the body. The body is tired, weak, and we're at peace with it, and there's no problem. But sometimes the fighting, the resistance, the wanting things to be something other than it is, that's where we add to it. But the good news is that we're adding to suffering. When we see clearly, we can also subtract from it. We can also, go beyond it. If our suffering is caused by other people, by external, there's not a whole lot we can do about it. But the beautiful thing about the teaching is, once we know that so much of the stress, the tension, the pleasantness in our mind is something we add on through not seeing clearly, then there's a path forward that something we can do, something we can work towards, something that we can achieve by understanding things clearly. What we're not understanding clearly is the three characteristics. Taking what is impermanent, the body, the world, external things, monastery, the sala, as something permanent, dependable. That's always going to be here. It's always going to be peaceful. It's always going to be in a certain way. And of course, that's asking for trouble. Because the body is stable, dependable enough when you're young, you're 20, you're 30, 40. But when you get to 50, 60, and 70, it's very clear that the body is not very dependable. Right? And the same with our mental states. It's natural. We all want to be happy, inspired, but that's not always also very dependable. Our moods changes. The mind changes all the time. So we don't attach to it. We see that there are some days that's very good, other days you're not feeling so great. But that's okay. The practice is just to step back, not to get attached, not to make a self out of things. To see clearly that these things are not dependable, not in our control, as much as we like to control things. And when we cling to anything, when we grasp at anything, when we make a self on anything, then really we're asking for trouble. And this is something that a lot of us understand as practitioners on an intellectual level. But that's where the practice comes in. When the mind is clear, when it's stable, when it has all the energy, then it sees clearly and it lets go. And you can't do that, by thinking. You can't think your way out of suffering. A lot of times what the thinking does is add to it. And that's the beauty of the practice. It's like the realization of these teachings. And the difference between practice and intellectual thinking. Some of you heard this simile by Ajahn Chah. It's like, eating durian. Right? Most Westerners don't know what durian looks like. So, but before you eat a durian, you can read lots of books about it. There's 300 and plus types of durian. The durian seed looks like this. this tree looks like that. You see pictures of it in a book. They describe how it tastes. You read lots of books about the different types, how to grow it, how to what to cook with it, all the recipes. You know everything about durian because you read so many books about it just to get an understanding of it. And after a while, you can write your own books about durian. What's it like? Well, all this knowledge that you have. But really, you still don't know what durian is. And the only way to really know that is to taste one. Once you taste one, you know for sure. But sometimes, you know, we rely on the intellectual understanding of it. And it helps to a certain point. But it is through the realization, it is through having a clear mind that we can truly let go of suffering. And that's something that happens gradually. Something happens through practice, to cultivating a still mind, cultivating meditation, cultivating harmlessness. And these, like I said, these qualities, spiritual power starts to grow naturally. And then after a while, it just works based on conditions. The letting go happens when the mind sees clearly. It's the same, we're all addicts to sense pleasure. It's like, you know, a person who smokes a cigarette, he's seen on the advertisement, he knows it's bad for him or her, but yet people smoke. Why is that? Because they really know for sure there's something else. It's the same with, you know, our attachment. Part of us know that these things sometimes bring suffering, but yet we attach. We attach to our loved ones, we attach to the body, attach to a sense of identity. Even though in the back of my mind we say, oh, I think I'm setting up for some suffering. But it is through seeing clearly. When you see clearly that these attachment causes suffering, then the mind lets go. But it's not like you can't have relationship or loved ones. You can still have them, but it's that the worry, the anxiety around them. The kind of managing, trying to manage other people. But when the mind sees clearly, then that lets go. So our responsibility is to establish the condition where letting go happens. So we're not there letting go. We establish the conditions where the mind doesn't attach to things. It sees clearly the stress of trying to be somebody, trying to get something, trying to get your jhanas, trying to become enlightened, trying to be, you know, the clever one, the smart one, the helpful one, the anything. Because we're always looking to be something, and which is fine. But from time to time, those things don't come together, and we get disappointed, embarrassed, sad. When we make mistakes, we don't do the right thing. If you're the smart one, then you always have to be the clever one in the room. And if you're not the most clever one, you say something wrong, then you're like, no. A lot of suffering comes from that. Or you're the friendly one, and you have a bad day, you get grumpy, and you go, oh, I'm not the friendly one anymore. But understand that these things are just conditioning. They come and go, and the mind is undependable. Our moods are undependable. The thing is just to see clearly as something, you know, anything arises, passes away. And it's anatta, it's out of our control. And the more we see that clearly, the more we can be with things, allow things to flow, and not to attach, not to make a problem out of life. Buddha said, you know, back to the Four Noble Truths. First is, obviously, there is the truth of suffering. Second is the truth of suffering has to be understood. That's the thing. Once you understand suffering, it's only then that the mind can let go. It's through not understanding clearly, not understanding 100%, that we continue to suffer. The third noble truth the Buddha taught was the different ways to let go of suffering. relinquishing, throwing it away, whatever attachment is. They're not roosting. The mind likes to roost. Something it just sticks on. So allowing things just to arise and then fade away, not holding on to things. But it only happens, we see clearly that anything we hold on will cause us suffering. Like this Buddha said, the cause of suffering has to be abandoned. So once we abandon the cause, and then the path to the abandonment of that practice is the path of practice. It's the Eight Noble Path, which is, you can summarize it based in Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. First is in harmlessness, to live a life of harmony, not harming ourselves and others, life of restraint, not distracting ourselves, not kind of using up the energy of the mind through distractions and different things, unskillful living. And then once the mind is fairly calm, has a good foundations, harmlessness and restraint, then that's where the practice of meditation starts to take off. Mind becomes more still. It doesn't move towards diversity, which is most of the world is always new things to go, new places to go, new restaurants to try, new toys to have. But the practice of Dhamma is always moving away from diversity to simplicity, then to unity, then to emptiness. And when the mind is more refined, you can see that the movement is, when you moved away from diversity, you're moving away from so much suffering, so much stress, so much worries. And as things disappear, that is happiness on a much more subtle level. Well, I think there was a quote somewhere. I think somebody, a lay person asked an enlightened nun, she says, what is happiness? She says, to be is, what is suffering, happiness? I think she said, to be anything, that's suffering. And the ending of being, the rising is the suffering, it's the cessation. That's the happiness comes in. But when we live in the world, we're always looking for the rising of things, new things to get excited about. New job, relationship, car, iPhones. As practitioner, we should be looking at how do we end things. And I started. And it is. As we practice, a lot of times it's always good to use common sense. Always look back. Where's my practice? Where's it going? Is it bringing me an increased sense of happiness, of peace, of stillness? In bringing me a sense of clarity, purpose. And it was very nice a couple of days ago when we had a bit of a round robin where people share their experience, and it's you can see it is a path of increasing sense of happiness, path of joy, just through cultivating a sense of gratitude, sense of belonging to something that is wholesome, something that is bringing peace and joy to everybody. And that's how you know this is something that's real and powerful. And that's why it lasted for so many years. Sometimes people come to the monasteries and say, why don't we kind of go out and advertise more Buddhism. It's like, no, truth has power, and people will come when they understand, when they get a feel for what's like, what's true peace, what's true clarity. And it's something that for everyone to judge for themselves, to know for themselves. What is well-being? What is kind of goodwill? That our sense of happiness doesn't come from always looking after number one. Actually, our sense of well-being, happiness comes from sharing and caring for others, for giving other happiness. That's how we truly become happy. And it's like I always tell people over and over again, it's a path of increasing happiness, of increasing sense of well-being. So that's why there's no need to rush to the end to be enlightened, to get your nibbana, whatever that means. As long as you keep walking the path, keep cultivating wholesome states, cultivating goodwill, generosity, clarity, kindness, forgiveness, all these spiritual qualities that people talk about, patience, and then you'll see suffering becomes less and less. Because you know how to work with the mind, cultivating anger. You understand that these moods have causes, and what feeds them. So you can direct the mind towards more wholesome states. So as we continue to practice the last few weeks of the rains, trying to turn our mind towards, some of the teaching of the Buddha. What is suffering? And what is the end of suffering? And hopefully we're learning to relinquish, lessen some of our sufferings for our own happiness, but also for the happiness of those who live with us. I offer that for your reflection tonight.
Dhammiyang Dhammakatha Sadhu Karang Tathamase Sa